much, Omar. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that some of my remarks are not redundant because I didn't have the opportunity to hear the previous speakers. But I do want to give some context to the U.S.-Iraqi relationship. There is very little historic context when these decisions are in the making. The press tends to click its heels whenever the president raises the flag and beats the drums of war. And so there's very little historical context. Very few Americans knew that we were allies of Saddam Hussein, that he was our brutal anti-communist dictator, that we would give him suspected names of communists in Iraq and he would slaughter them. And when the Ayatollah took over in Iran, he became a useful buffer for the United States during the 80s. In the 1990 period, for whatever reason, he got the wrong signal from us, and in a dispute in terms of underground oil that was under both the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border, he thought he could resolve that dispute by taking the territory. And then he got an even more mistaken signal from our diplomats and proceeded to invade the country wholesale. That, of course, broke the relationship that we had with him. In the 80s, Ronald Reagan, Department of Commerce licensed materials for chemical and biological warfare. They knew he was likely to use them, but we still allowed our companies under Department of Commerce license to sell them the materials for anthrax, deadly chemicals and poison gas. And this continued under George Bush the First. None of this, of course, was described, nor was it described that we encouraged him to invade Iran, giving him intelligence that it was going to be an easy invasion. He could slice off part of southwest Iran and add it to Iraq. It turned out just to be the opposite, but we certainly didn't hesitate to give him surveillance data, intelligence data, and arms and credits for his war against the Ayatollah regime. That's why historical context is very important, and that's why it's denied people. All we heard was the fabrications, deceptions, prevarications, often contrary to his administration's own intelligence experts, especially the State Department, which had it correct, but was not as influential as the CIA or the Defense Department in either obeying the pressures from the White House to come up with the right answers, even though they were false, or actually conveying inadequate intelligence. Now, this has come out in Bob Woodward's book, and Richard Clarke's book, and all kinds of leaks, congressional testimony, good investigative reports by a media that woke up after assuming its conventional supine status. It finally realized it was lied to, and it began going into the background of the Bush administration. The problem, of course, here is that as a society we're very ill-equipped to even derivatively participate in the shaping of foreign policy. Our democracy becomes the thinnest of all in the area of military and foreign policy, partly because it is foreign policy, and we don't appear to have a grip on some of the rudimentary facts, as is the case in domestic policy, partly because there's a xenophobia operating here, and not only in other countries, and partly because the military has extremely powerful symbols to camouflage sometimes pretty disagreeable, if not outright devastating forays abroad. And so those of you who were aware of the years after 9/11 knew how a president who's unscrupulous enough to seize on that, to concentrate power in the White House at the expense of the Congress and the judiciary. That's what the Patriot Act was all about. And to further strip the judiciary of a more strict role in terms of probable cause and due process. That the concentration of power flowed from the Congress, willingly often. The war resolution of 2002 was an unconstitutional delegation of war declaring authority to the president. It's amazing how over the years, extremely important provisions of our Constitution are viewed as mere technicalities. And Article 1, Section 8 was the war declaring authority, which Madison called one of the highest forms of wisdom in their deliberations in 1787. What he meant is that the drafters of the Constitution, wary of another King George, did not want to put the declaration of authority in the hands of one person, namely the president. They explicitly said it had to be a deliberative process under the legislative branch. But over the years, both parties had presidents who could argue that modern warfare was too quick, there wasn't enough deliberative time, give us a resolution. And of course, in their foresight, the drafters of our Constitution missed the big one. This is the big one they missed. They never dreamed that any branch of our government would ever willingly give up its constitutional authority. Therefore, they had no remedy. That is, they didn't explicitly give the standing to go to the courts by citizens challenging Congress's unlawful grant of war declaration authority to the executive branch. So, the people who did file suit were basically non-suited. They were basically told that they had no standing to sue, or it was a political question not suitable for the courts. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says to the courts, you cannot evade your responsibilities here. Now, when you don't have that kind of safeguard, then the president will find the Congress easy pickings. First of all, large numbers of legislators do not have the singular anthropomorphic focus in front of the media as the president does. I mean, you can just look. I mean, the networks give the president coverage. You don't often see Congress or members of Congress in rebuttal. And besides, they don't represent the whole Congress, while the president represents the executive branch. And secondly, and this is very, very important, is that the members of Congress operate like a crowd. Any of you who've read the book that came out about 1898 in France by Le Bon called The Crowd would understand the way Congress behaves. It is easily stampeded, easily panicked. The few people in the Congress who raise the banners of resistance or statesmanship are overridden. And that's the problem that imbalances in reality the power between the presidency and the Congress. So you cannot expect a grand debate. You cannot expect, even in a war that was foreshadowed longer than any other recent war. I mean, this was not something that had to be made instantly. The drums of war were beating for months, indeed more than months. And it was perfectly suited for an Article 1, Section 8 debate on whether or not to declare war. And Congress ducked. Now, there is a culpability in Congress abandoning its constitutional duties. But there's also a culpability in the president demanding unconstitutional authority in the form of a war resolution that basically said to President Bush, you decide when to invade Iran. And so I think that's the first step toward beginning the impeachment, the liberation in this country. The second step, before Clinton was impeached for lying under oath about sex, impeachment was given excessive degree of awe in our country. Actually, it was simply a mechanism that the Founding Fathers put in the Constitution, giving the authority to Congress under a very deliberative process, partly ascribed to the House and the trial to the Senate, to fire the president. Everybody is subject to being fired. But it had that kind of awe-struck dimension to it until Clinton de-awed it with his with his vulnerable behavior. Now, I don't think the Founding Fathers could have provided a more serious scenario than a president using unconstitutional authority, plunging a nation into war on a platform of repeated fabrications, deceptions, and prevarications, otherwise known as false pretenses. But you see, the Republicans are far more determined than the Democrats. As Kevin Phillips, the political analyst, put it before Bill Moyers a few weeks ago, he said, the Republicans go for the jugular and the Democrats go for the capillaries. So the Republicans really went after Clinton, and the Democrats have not even reached the stage of proposing an impeachment inquiry. Not filing the bill of impeachment, but an impeachment inquiry. And the closest person who's gotten to that preliminary stage, but is receiving a lot of negative signals, is the speaker you're going to hear shortly, Congressman John Conyers. Another aspect of the lure of warmongering is that there are distinct political advantages to unscrupulous executives in warmongering. Number one, you chill out the opposing party, and he certainly did that. When he received the war resolution in October 2002, he went around the country beating up on Democratic candidates, including Senator Max Cleland, and he was deemed to be unrebuttable. After all, it's not proper to rebut a wartime president, anointed to no small degree by the Democrats, whose candidates he pummeled without any repudiation. And of course, they paid the price and lost to Congress in 2002, when it should have won it. The second advantage is it chills public dissent. Not only does it chill public dissent, but it really chills dissent among people who are suspected of stereotypes that they don't deserve, like Muslim Americans and Arab Americans, who were more than chilled, but they were subjected, and still are, to this informal pattern of mistreatment, silent gazes, exclusionary behavior, epithets, and so on. And of course, since thousands of them were arrested without charges and detained without lawyers in prison, and others were material suspects, and others were roughly interrogated, and many were mistreated physically in this city too, according to the Inspector General of John Ashcroft's Justice Department. That this ethnic group, this religious group, could have been expected to be very, very fearful, even though they probably knew a good deal more about what Bush was going to get into, because they came from that area of the world, and they knew that the Iraqis were not going to simply provide flowers and bouquets and fresh fruits to our troops just because they despised our formerly backed brutal dictatorship. Now, the other advantages accrue are large numbers of contracts, which do create jobs when you have a war economy, and they also make very happy many of the Republican Party's benefactors in the corporate world, starting but not ending with Halliburton and Bechtel Corporation. As if that's not enough, President Bush's strong suit has never been domestic policy. His strong suit has never been responding or thinking about the necessities of the American people. And this kind of warmongering and vectoring outward toward Baghdad became a very successful distraction from paying attention